Hi, and good evening. I'm Yaakov Katz, a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, and welcome to another episode of Israel's war, an inside analysis, of Israel's war against Hamas. There's obviously a lot happening and a lot going on, and today we'll be talking to a couple of people. One of them is Barbara Opel Rome, the former Defense News correspondent in Israel. Barbara, good to see you. I see we have an issue maybe with the video. We'll fix that in a moment. We're also going to be joined by an old friend of mine, Seth Frantzman. He'll be joining us in a couple of minutes. Seth is a longtime veteran analyst of this region, writing for a number of publications, including the Jerusalem Post. He's the author of a book, Drone Wars. And I'll be talking to Seth and Barbara about the technology aspect of this war. Of course, we're also going to discuss just a bit about the hostage deal. That is definitely in the headlines, and talking a bit about what this all means and where it's all going. I'll just share one idea and one thought that I had this morning when I was thinking about, after the news of the cabinet passing the decision and approving this deal, is that in Israel, we're probably of split feelings, right? There are those who are thrilled or happy, at least, of the fact that some of the hostages, the children and the women and the elderly women, definitely will be coming home. But there are others who are very concerned about what will happen with the continuation of the war. And I kind of thought of it as being the Israeli mind, or the head, and the Israeli heart. The mind and the head say to the Israeli, this war needs to continue. We're not yet done with the mission of eliminating, of weakening, of toppling Hamas from its governing position over the Gaza Strip. And there's concern that if you stop for 4 or 5, 6 days, however long it takes, that could take the momentum out of the operation. It will make it harder to go into southern Gaza. Hamas will have the opportunity and take advantage of the lull to reposition, rearm, redeploy. But then there's the Israeli heart. And the heart says that we have to do everything we can to get back these 30 kids and the women and the elderly, and how the country violated a social contract with its people when 240 of them almost were taken captive by Hamas on that tragic day of October 7th. And Israel has to do everything it can to recover and bring those people back home. Because also, when you think about it, while it's just the heart, it's also national security. If we can't, we the people, can't feel that we trust our state and our leaders and our government, then what's left here? And I think that's very much where I'm looking at this issue at the moment. Rationally, I think that there are huge problems with stopping, but emotionally, I totally understand the need to do this. We're gonna talk a bit more about that with our panel, Seth and Barbara. But before that, I did an interview yesterday with someone who I found to be really fascinating and interesting, and I think you will too, Representative Congressman Max Miller from Ohio's 7th District. Max is one of 2 Jewish Republicans in the House of Representatives in Congress. He came here recently as part of a small delegation to meet with Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Netanyahu. And it's just interesting to hear his perspective of what he saw in Israel, as well as the explosion of anti-Semitism in the United States. He's obviously a Republican, and you'll get that very clearly in the way that he speaks. So here is Congressman Max Miller. I'm glad to be joined by Congressman Max Miller. He's talking to us. He's a congressman from Ohio's 7th District, now just outside of Cleveland. Max, it's great to have you with us at JPPI. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here and to be here with you.
Thank you. So, let's start with, you are one of 2 Jewish Republican congressmen in the House of Representatives. And I was reading an interview that you did after your recent visit to Israel. You were here just a couple of weeks ago, shortly after the October 7th attacks and massacre. And I'd like to ask, number one is, what made you feel compelled to come? And number 2 is, I understand that the Defense Department, the Pentagon, people were telling you not to come, and you had to kind of figure out a way to get here under the radar a bit.
Yeah. To answer your first question, simply, I was raised for this. I'm an American, but I'm a Jew, and those things always go hand in hand, and that's who I am, and that's who I was raised. And so going to Israel, whether the Defense Department said we could go or not, didn't deter me. We went with a very small group of people, bipartisan delegation. And as a United States Marine and as someone who's Jewish, and as you said, just one of two, Israel is also home for me and for my people. And I'm not afraid to admit that. Yes, I am a proud American. I served my country in the Marine Corps, but I'm also a proud Jew. And we need to protect Israel and every Jewish life and non-Jewish life with inside of it. So I went there to see, what had happened on October 7th. This was unfortunately my fifth trip to a war zone in my 35 years of living. And what I witnessed was the most barbaric attacks that I have ever seen in going to a fifth war zone. And it became very clear to me that we are dealing with Nazism and it needs to be eradicated.
One of the relationship and the alliance, I would say, between Israel and the United States is long. It's decades long, and it's, depending on which politician you talk to, it's unshakable, it's unbreakable. Now, it's always had its ups and downs, but one of the big things that's on the table right now is obviously the military support that Israel needs. And you co-authored a bill that talks about providing Israel with emergency Iron Dome interceptors. I think you submitted this. October 7th was the attacks. This came out like October 9th or 10th, just within days, right? Can you explain to us what that bill is about, what the idea was?
Yeah, it was immediately to go ahead and show the rest of the world that we are standing with Israel and that the United States will never waver in our support for our greatest democratic ally in the Middle East. And also, look, the United States was the first country in the entire world to recognize Israel in 1948. And it is our duty to stand by her as the only democracy. So yes, we put that forward. I hope it does hit the floor. I hope that, we can also get through another supplemental without IRS cuts attached to it. To be very frank, I'm once again a conservative, but I am not in Congress to play games. I am not here for gimmicks. Our Israeli friends need our help. We never should have put any type of cuts to a supplemental to help them. And I hope that the new speaker will do the right thing and put a new supplemental on the floor so we can get Israel the help that it needs as of yesterday.
This is the $14 billion or so that are being spoken about for Israel in aid from the Congress?
Yes, that part I was referring just to the aid and the supplemental that was passed out of the House in a very bipartisan manner, but right now it's stuck in the Senate because Senator Schumer will not take it because of the IRS cuts that are attached to the supplemental. And believe it or not, you probably don't hear this too often, and I don't think I've ever said this, but I agree with Senator Chuck Schumer, and I don't agree with him on much of anything, but you do not put cuts when it comes to your greatest Democratic ally if you are trying to get them help. And I'll wrap with this on this part. Americans were killed. I mean, think about that. Over 25 Americans were killed in the greatest terrorist attack since 9/11, right? And what was our response? We need to be vigilant, and Israel needs the latitude to do what it needs to do in order to protect herself.
So you've also been outspoken about the rise is not even the right word, the explosion of anti-Semitism, college campuses, marches of neo-Nazis I saw in Madison, Wisconsin, throughout my hometown of Chicago, not far, another fellow Midwesterner. But you have an explosion across the US and around the world right now. And you have members of Congress who, let's face it, they are anti-Semites as well. You were very active and played a role in trying to lead a censure of Rashida Tlaib, the congresswoman from Michigan. What can be done to fight this plague of Jew hate that is all over the place right now?
So we can start with Rashida Tlaib, who's an abhorrent individual who says the river to the sea, which is a genocidal comment to the Jewish people within Israel and really just to the Jewish people within Israel. We need to have a larger talk about the First Amendment within our country, and I think around the entire globe. And yes, Americans here within our country, you can say whatever you'd like. And yesterday I did a town hall with Shontel Brown, who's a Democrat congresswoman. There were about 500 people there. And, protesters stood up and they interrupted our discussion and said, free Palestine. Okay. That's okay with me. If you want to stand up and say free Palestine, fine. It's not a country. It's not a territory. It's just a piece of land. That's okay. But if you're going to incite violence, the censure, look, it's a slap on the wrist. She's the 26th person in our country's history to ever be censured in the United States Congress. But I'm just going to say it, it's not enough. And right now, we don't have enough votes to expel her out of Congress. And think about that for a second. That's the disappointing part. And so what can we do? We need to just not say, oh, you did a bad thing. You don't like Jews from the river to the sea. No, she needs to be expelled from Congress, and people actually need to face consequences for their actions. And this also goes for college campuses and universities who harbor hate and who harbor and protect these individuals who support terrorists. Enough is enough. And I really think that the First Amendment does have a limit. I think the First Amendment has a limit, just like when you decide to break the law and to hurt somebody. That's what this woman is doing. And also, I'll wrap with this on this part. There was an elderly white man who was killed in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago by a pro-Palestinian supporter. And this makes people very uncomfortable, but I don't have a filter. He was killed by a pro-Palestinian supporter by throwing a megaphone at his head. Have you heard anything? Because I promise you, if he was a minority, there would be riots in the streets all throughout the country of the United States of America in every major city. But no one cares because one, he's white, and two, he's Jewish. And we need to continue to push back every single Jew, regardless of political affiliation, and understand that we are fighting for our existence here as a people. And not only as a people, but we're fighting for our existence for Western democracy here within this country. Bibi's right. This is an existential fight, not only for Israel, but for the United States of America and the rest of the civilized world around us.
Sadly, though, it doesn't seem like people understand that yet, right? It doesn't seem like the current administration understands that. The woke progressives, definitely on the college campuses, don't understand that. I'd be worried as a fellow American. I'm an Israeli American, but as a fellow American, I look at what's happening in America. I'm concerned. Are we protect? I mean, if you look at what's going on the college campuses, you look at what's being spoken about, what's being written in the media, you hear some of the voices within the other, at least on the other side of the aisle, it makes you feel a bit concerned. America is declining in power.
Yeah, and you have every right to think that way. And as a legislator, I feel that way. Someone who served in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps was a lot different back then when I served in it than what it is now, and so is this country. I mean, let's face it, we have lost the messaging war and the soul for the United States of America. And certain issues and societal norms that have changed, that have really rocked our country that people don't think about, but it has taken shape. I mean, our education system, we have people who are being indoctrinated. And that's, I hope Israelis and the rest of the world see that TikTok and Instagram Reels and Twitter, they come up with these algorithms. And a lot of people don't know the history. And a lot of people who are born right now don't even know what 9/11 is, for context. And that's what we're dealing with right now in the United States of America. When you go on TikTok and you see young men and women reading Osama bin Laden's letter, thinking, oh my God, he was right. What world are we living in when an American young man or young woman reads Osama bin Laden's letter and finds some emotional connection to it? I mean, I carry now a weapon on me every single day, and I'm not afraid to admit that. I think Jews should be, they're keeping their head on a swivel. Absolutely. I never received an anti-Semitic threat on my life until October 7th, ever since I've been a legislator. Now,
what have people said to you? Or written
things that I wouldn't want to share with my wife. So hopefully, sweetie, you're not going to watch this. But no, I mean, look, they say that, they're going to kill the Jew pig. They call me a kike. They're going to cut my head off. They're going to rape my wife. They're going to kill my newborn daughter, who's roughly 18 days old. I mean, things like that people are continuously contacting with me about. But here's the thing. They're not my constituents. And I want to make that really clear. When legislators get threats or compliments sometimes, which is rare, or a lot of hate, which is common, they're usually not your constituents. And so I'm proud to say that Ohio 7, where I represent, our people don't harbor that type of hate. And so I know that they're probably kooky people represented by probably Matt Gaetz that need to go away. And we just ignore them. But to change that, is you're looking at two people right here who can change that narrative in terms of Jews and anti-Semitism. And I'm looking at right now two tough Jews. And we need to change this narrative within the United States of America and the entire world that Jews are a weak people. I'm not weak. I'm not going to be a victim. You're not going to kill me like sheep. Absolutely not. Those days are over. We are done hiding. We are done cowering. We are out in your face. And it's because we're not afraid anymore. And we have a reason not to be afraid. We are now in the civilized world. We have people like you and like me who will continue to stand up for the Jewish people, even if that means I have to give my life for it. And it's the same oath that I took when I went into the military. It's the same oath I took when I got this job as a legislator, and it's who I am. And as I told you in the beginning, I was raised for this, being Jewish. My father, my mother, the family that I come from, I am a proud Jew. I've always been this way. So it's not as if October 7th has been this massive revelation for me and I've all of a sudden found Hashem. No, this is who I am. And you know what? It's like they've awoken the bear Jew from Inglorious Bastards, essentially. And if you want to come mess around and find out, you're going to see what happens. And Israel is doing a phenomenal job reacting to this, conducting the way they need to in this warfare. And I couldn't be more proud to combat anti-Semitism anywhere that it is.
Wow. Congressman Max Miller from Ohio 7th, I want to thank you very much for joining us at the Jewish People Policy Institute. Thank you, and thank you for your service.
No, and thank you, and Am Yisrael Chai. We will always stand with you.
Amen. Okay, if you watched that interview, you might have noticed that I was smiling a bit through it because that guy, he's interesting, and really, ready to fight. But I want to, Seth, thank you very much for joining us. Good to see you as well. I want to start with Barbara. I opened up with Seth a bit about talking about the hostages. And I want us, yes, to focus on the topic that we said we would talk about, technology and how the hardware that we're seeing in this war. Before that, I want to get both of your feelings on the deal that has been crafted and been approved by the cabinet and is likely to start to go into effect tomorrow. It seems 10 a.m. Israel time. So Barbara, why don't I start with you? What's your take on this deal? And, good for Israel, bad for Israel? What should we be thinking about?
Well, Yaakov, you were so correct when you said that this is a struggle, a battle between the hearts and the minds. And but I would venture to say that this deal should have been concluded 46 days ago. And it should have been concluded with, I don't care, all of the prisoners in Israeli jails. Israel could then have done what it needed to do at a time of its choosing with conditions that are more propitious to the government of Israel. But unless those hostages are returned, no matter how many strategic and tactical gains are made on the ground, no matter how many days of war fighting or how hard the blow is to the Hamas leadership, Israel will be perceived as having lost this war.
Wow. Seth, what do you think?
About this hostage deal? I mean, yeah. Look, there never should have been 240 hostages taken in the first place. I think that most state actors in the world couldn't figure out how to capture 240 people if you asked their special forces to do it. So the fact that Hamas was able to do this in the beginning is a huge scandal. Israel's people should never have been left so unprotected. Obviously, once it happens, then the government's responsibility has to be to get all of those people back, especially obviously the civilians. And it's not entirely clear how to do that. It's also not clearly. They could have been able to see your citizens to be kidnapped a few kilometers away from your border and not be able to get them back. So, Israel is now stuck in some weird endless negotiation that will go on probably for years.
Seth, you're breaking up a bit on us.
Of our lives, in years.
Okay, Seth, I don't know if you can improve maybe the quality of the Wi-Fi, but you were breaking up a bit on us just before.
Yaakov, if I may jump in here,
Sure.
because this segues into our conversation that we'll have on technology. But as the events of October 7th became so painfully clear, no matter how wonderful your technology is and how much of a superpower you are, unless you take advantage of that technology, it means very little.
Right.
Unless if Israel neglects to use that technology as it neglected through failure and the sin of arrogance, perhaps, on that horrible day. Look what we're all suffering. The whole state of Israel and the Jewish people are suffering from a gang of at the most 40,000 terrorists. We expect evil and heinous acts from the other side, from the terrorists, but we never expected Israel to break its social contract and not take advantage of the capabilities at its hand. This is a self-inflicted travesty.
You know, what you're saying reminds me of a few days into the war. Someone reaches out to me from a very serious U.S. publication, an editor there, and says, "Can you write a piece about how Iron Dome has failed?" And I said, "Iron Dome has failed? It's actually doing a great job intercepting rockets." No, but they were able to get in. How were they able to break into Israel? So I said, no, you're confused. That has nothing to do with Iron Dome. But people had this concept of as if Iron Dome was the defenses of everything and could intercept not just rockets, but also terrorists crossing the border. Seth, Barbara touches upon something that is interesting, and maybe this does tie into technology, of how maybe the over-reliance on the technology that Israel has, whether it's missile defense, whether it's AI, whether it's digital transformation, that was the Kochavi, the former chief of staff's terminology. Maybe what that did was it blinded us from seeing the basics. And by the way, I mean, I'll just, in parentheses for a moment, the whole fiasco in the beginning of the war with the ceramic vests and the helmets and not having the basics, right, was maybe also a symptom of that blindness. What do you think, Seth?
Well, I mean, technology is great. It's just like, you have Waze for your car, you have all sorts of things, but you can use Waze. But if you're driving and Waze tells you to take a right-hand turn, in fact, what is the right-hand turn is just takes you right off a cliff. You as a human being need to stop the car and say, wait a second, there's obviously something wrong here. The problem is that we have all the technology, but the technology is never going to be a substitute for human beings, right? If you can have remote weapon stations, which they had on the border, if the remote weapon station can be destroyed by a drone, a $20 drone or a $200 drone, then what was the point of the remote weapon station? If you have all these observers on the border, but they're not backed up by any troops to protect them, and then the enemy overruns the observation post, so then it doesn't function anymore. I mean, I've done a lot of interviews since this war began, and in almost every single one of them, I've been surprised by interviewing people, especially in the army, including in the army, who say they had to drive their personal car all the way down. They had to pick up people to get to their units. There was no commander telling them what to do. They didn't ever know until the next day how bad the situation was. And you say to yourself, wait a second, how's that possible? I mean, in Vietnam, they had radios where they could tell you that the offensive was happening. In 2023, no commander could tell his division what to do. I mean, so I think, again, it just shows that, yeah, they relied on a lot of technology. They didn't know how to use it. They didn't use it well. And maybe it's like the French with the Maginot Line. The French poured billions of dollars, I guess, in the Maginot Line. It did them absolutely no good. So it seems to me, unfortunately, we've learned a very painful lesson like that.
And in this case, Israel poured billions of dollars into defending against the underground attack tunnels, but they just went through the gate, walked through the gate, paraglided into Israel, poor female observers, and they were slaughtered at their own base.
So, Seth talked about the cars. I actually heard a story yesterday from somebody about a reserve unit that's in one of the Palestinian cities, West Bank cities in the area, in the West Bank. And, they go in, they do arrest operations, security. So they don't have any Jeeps. There are just no armored troops. So they've rented a Kia Picanto or something like that, like one of these Kia cars. And they go into one of these big West Bank cities and arrest people in a rental car, because that's what's going on. Like something is strange here. But okay, I want to zoom out of that for a moment. Barbara, we have seen, though, some sophisticated use of technology. I want to highlight three. Tell me some that you've also seen. I want to just get your input on what are those what are you seeing that's interesting in this war? First of all, missile defense. Obviously, we saw, Iron Dome has been there for a while, but we've seen David Sling used effectively. We've seen Arrow 2, Arrow 3 do their first operational interceptions, all successful, impressive. 2, the Trophy is working overtime in Gaza on armored personnel carriers and tanks. We could talk about that. And I think that there's also been a lot of artificial intelligence and AI in terms of targeting. So those are things that I've seen. Talk to me about what makes this war unique when it comes to the technological advancements of the IDF.
Well, you've hit on all the main components of this enormous technological evolution. I would add to that the F-35 fifth generation fighter, which allows full integration of all the other F-15s and F-16s in the Israeli Air Force cadre. But again, and the missile defense, it's very, very important that there has been great successes in integrating this. Not only all the layers, the Iron Dome at the lowest layer, and then the David Sling, the Arrow 2, the Arrow 3, but also the integration with the American presence in the Eastern Med, because they have the THAAD that is akin to the Arrow 3, and they have even more with the Aegis capabilities. So the defense capabilities are phenomenal. Just this morning, I don't know, maybe you've heard more. Cruise missile was intercepted from the Houthis on its way to Eilat. I don't know if that was
it was by apparently an F-35 carried on.
Was it F-35? So that's a whole new capability. As far as artificial intelligence is concerned, I would surmise that it is being used to predict and perhaps track and locate where some of these hostages are being held. I would like to think that they are using AI to narrow down the area where the hostages may be held captive, and to adjust their battle plans accordingly. Because worst of all is to be killed by friendly fire.
Just one question on Arrow 3 for a moment. How significant was its use here in this battle against the Houthi missiles that were fired? And is that message of its success going to resonate maybe to the Iranians, who are our primary threat of ballistic missiles?
Maybe, but I think more so is the intense and friendly competition between all the various arms of the Israel air defense capabilities. The ground-based air defense missiles, this is a wonderful selling point, the inauguration of the Arrow 3, the first successful operational intercept. It's a huge badge of honor, and you can't ignore the publicity and the pat on the back that's required after so many years and so much money that's been invested in it. And the air launch, you said just now that the F-35 was to be credited with today's intercept. So Israel, thank goodness, has a very robust and multi-layered air defense system, but keep in mind, so does the other side. If, God forbid, a war would break out on the northern front, Iranian-supplied air defenses in Syria could be a game leveler.
Seth, you wrote a book in 2021 called Drone Wars, Pioneers, Killing Machines, Artificial Intelligence, and the Battle for the Future. That future is here, right? We're using drones around the clock, but so are our enemies on both fronts. Lebanon, we're seeing the use of drones, as well as Hamas has made sophisticated use, not just on October 7th, when they used drones to drop, explosives on some of those borderline defenses to take them out, but they've been using also to attack. What significance is this? Like Israel's first big drone war to some extent?
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing now the future. I mean, Israel is a country that's pioneered drones since the 1980s, but we're now seeing exactly as Barbara just talked about, a situation of leveling where the adversary is able to use, not just cheap quadcopters you can buy at a store online, but they themselves have developed a huge, menagerie of types of drones, kamikaze drones that function kind of like cruise missiles, surveillance drones, all sorts of stuff. And we're seeing every single day in the northern border penetration attempts with different types of aerial vehicles, most of which are being shot down, some of which are buzzing in, buzzing back. We've seen, obviously, Hamas use lots of drones on October 7th, and also since then. Israel had said over the time that it had taken out a bunch of Hamas members who were involved in manufacturing drones. So the fact that these terrorist groups are able to make them themselves, they're getting models probably downloaded offline or taken from the Iranians. They find ways to print them or make them. So it's obviously a whole new world order. I think the only lesson from all this is the drones don't win the war. They give you all sorts of new tools to use. Some of them allow you to attack without losing any casualties. Hamas used to use suicide bombers. Now they can use drones, right? I mean, it allows armies to do all sorts of things without losing people. But the drone itself doesn't win the day. It's another tool. And until a country or a terror group finds a way to use a significant number of them in a kind of multi-layered fashion, then you won't see, I think, the next stage of this where the drone becomes the way the Air Force was in the Second World War, or something where it's a tool that actually dominates the battlefield so much that the enemy is just totally defeated by it.
I want to ask the two of you as we wrap up, is there something that's surprised you in terms of whether it's Hamas capabilities or something new that you've seen that Israel has done or not done and you thought you would have seen in this war in terms of technology? Barbara, why don't we start with you?
All right, Jaco, first of all, I know you're too modest to blow your own horn, but you've also written a fabulous book with Amir Bochbolt on how the best and the brightest in Israel, with generous support from the Americans, has how it develops and applies the technology to serve its wartime aims. But one thing I just like to throw out there is that something that I assume has not been done is the use of artificial intelligence to help Israel at all levels, whether it's ground force or air force, brigade level, division level. I think they need to hone their ability for what's called checkmate or red team. Those the processes that will allow others to question Israel's assumptions, to be the skeptics, and to poke holes in all of Israel's battle plans at all echelons. I really hope, obviously it hasn't been done, and I really hope that they will start to apply those capabilities, enhanced, of course, and organized through human judgment.
Very interesting. I think it's in military intelligence in Amman, it's known as the Ibcha Mistabra team, right? Which is like a Talmudic phrase for the looking at things on the other side. But like you said, it's the red team. It's basically constantly trying to poke holes in the intelligence assessments, in the assumptions, and in what we think. And you know what? It's a great idea. It should be applied to battle plans too, right? You think you want to go this way, maybe you should actually be going that way, because this way is how they would set things up. And that could be very interesting. Seth, what has caught your eye? Maybe what Hamas has and where we should maybe improve.
Well, I think what's caught my eye a bit is that despite all this new high-tech stuff, Israel and Hamas are still fighting a war that looks like a war decades ago. I mean, Israel is fighting in Gaza. I mean, it has lots of new tech, but the slow, methodical destruction of neighborhoods and things bit by bit is kind of what happened in 2009. I don't think it's actually much different. Hamas is using tactics with motorcycles and stuff that ISIS used. I mean, so actually the irony is they have all these new tools, but a lot hasn't changed, to be honest, in the way the kind of the big army the kind of big bludgeoning army is kind of, running around in Gaza like an elephant. And I think the problem is that we have to ask tough questions about, well, wait a sec, we were promised a lot more efficient warfare. We were promised something in which sensor shooters all together, everything moves much faster.
Yeah.
Well, then what happened to why aren't we able to fight a war like 1967? How come Israel in previous wars was actually able to do what they were pretending they were going to do the next time? And I think that leads to very serious questions. I mean, we see what's happening in Gaza. It is not rapid maneuver. It is the old style way of taking several big fat divisions of tanks and infantry and moving them around the city to slowly take that city. I'm not sure if Israel in 1970 had to take Gaza, it would have done it probably faster. So I think there's a lot of questions that come out of this conflict about how the technology was used. The technology's there. It's a question is how it actually gets used. It seems to me a lot of it is used to make it so that troops in the field never really have to encounter the enemy too much. So, for instance, if you have a building and there's like a 1% chance that there's an RPG team somewhere in that building, they'll spend a lot of time using a huge amount of firepower to neutralize that 1% person that could be in there, as opposed to just sending the armored brigade right through it and saying, okay, let's take our chances and see what happens. And I think that's so. Yeah, it's a huge amount of technology to eliminate one very small threat. And I think then you wonder, well, wait, are you using way too much for something and not using it for something else? And I think that's where, if there's ever sort of a debriefing after this, a lessons learned, we're going to have to ask a lot of questions about how all these precision munitions and all this stuff was used.
If I may interject, we have a half a minute.
Go ahead.
Seth, his point about this age-old maneuvering warfare is correct, but I must say that the digitized program, the Army program that allows the infantry to be connected with the tanks and the artillery, is cutting down on incidents of friendly fire. And
yes.
Israel just emotionally and psychologically needs the military to continue to act with force protection as a primary consideration. So if we were going back to the 67 war, 73 war, we would, God forbid, have seen a lot more Israeli soldiers that would have been killed in action.
I'll just say that I think that you're both right, that there's going to have to be a real in-depth study and review of the reliance on technology. One of the reasons I think that we fell in love, and by the way, the strategic failure of October 7th, which is that the policy of containment does not work and does not succeed. One of the reasons that we fell in love with it and we thought it would work was because we fell in love with, as Seth called them, the precision strike capabilities, right? We said, oh, there's a guy in a bedroom, we'll drop a missile through the window onto his bed and kill him and not the kids next door, which is amazing. But you're trying to take out a terrorist group by looking for the needle in the haystack, as opposed to understanding you got to burn down the whole haystack, right? And I think that this is where the technology and the policy and the more strategic policy connecting together led us to some extent to this disaster. It might have been a very humane way to fight, and we were able to say to our friends around the world, look, who else fights this way? And it's true, no one else does. But maybe there was a reason no one else does, because it didn't work to eliminate the ultimate threat. So, I think that this is going to be a story that's going to accompany us in definitely in the months and years to come. I'll just say, there's a few people who are not upset necessarily with the technology that we're seeing on the battlefield, and those are the defense companies that I'm guessing are getting a lot of phone calls right now of potential clients who are looking to buy David Sling, Arrow, Trophy, and other, the Digital Army program by Elbit, known as Sayad, and some of these other programs. So I want to just, with that, thank our two panelists, Seth Fransman, a senior analyst for the Jerusalem Post, Barbara Opel-Rome, former Israel correspondent for Defense News, really two of Israel's finest experts on Israeli defense technology and sales. And a thanks also to Representative Max Miller from Ohio 7th District, for his words before. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow evening for another episode of JPPI. In the meantime, have a good night. Thank you.